hi, or as we say in Denmark, hi. In this video, I'm going to talk about this and how it compares to this. In other words, I will be talking about the new Linnstrument speed bumpy surfaces from SoundWorkshop. So this new brilliant development comes at this point in time in two flavors called HotDogs and SoyBeans, referring to the shape of the little notches. So if you've not seen my previous video about the HotDogs version, I will put a link in the description. I would definitely advise you to see that one first, as it paints the fuller picture of my opinion on these new surfaces in general. Everything I say there to a large extent applies to this SoyBeans version as well. So this video will mainly be about the differences between the two. First of all, I just have to say again that the speed bumpy surface, no matter which of the two versions we're looking at, is for me the completion of the Linnstrument. For me, it's a surprisingly remarkable improvement in, and I can't help saying this, every single way. And yes, it probably makes me sound like a silly fanboy, but I can promise you this, I am the world's most useless salesman. There is no way I can shut up about stuff that annoys me or that I know can be easily improved. In fact, Chris from SoundWorkshop, who I should not fail to mention, sent me this one free of charge, asked me to be as brutal as possible in my judgment, but I had to tell him that I could not really guarantee that I could find anything to complain about. I did, however, manage to find one little thing to put on the cons list. All right, super short recap of my Linnstrument history. 7 years ago, I bought this Linnstrument, and quite quickly I realized that pitch quantizing was not my preference, so I turned it off. Also, it did not take me long to start experimenting with modifying the surface, as I was not a big fan of the original hard-edged gaps between the squares. So after a bit of experimentation, I discovered a particular plastic strip made for model building that fit exactly in the space of the gaps. So that gave me a really smooth surface that I liked. So when Chris announced his new surface, I did not really see myself as the target group, because his surface has these notches for each note, and I was just enjoying my very smooth surface. So fast forward to me actually playing this new one, which is the HotDogs in the previous video. Well, the huge moment for me was discovering that I can now play polyphonic stuff with no pitch quantizing that I would have very little chance of pulling off on the original surface. The notches just gave me such a confidence when playing polyphonically. Because of the tactile feedback, it really opened up the scope of what I could do on the Linnstrument. And well, I was honestly blown away by how much I liked it. So now this, the SoyBean version of the new surface. Had you asked me which one I believed I would have liked the most prior to me trying any of them, I would definitely have gone with this one, with the way smaller notches, as I at the time regarded smoothness to be the way. But I've now played the SoyBeans for about a month and also done a bit of swapping back and forth between the two. And I feel my opinion has matured enough to say it out loud. My preference is the HotDogs version. The thing is, when playing the SoyBean version, when playing the SoyBean version polyphonically, I can play the same stuff as with the HotDogs, but I just have to focus a lot more, and even then the hit rate is just lower. So I really miss the very confident feedback I get from my fingertips when they are on the HotDogs. A huge amount of practicing might be able to change that. But to put it pragmatically, why would I take something I really gel with, the HotDogs, and change to something that's harder for me to play with seemingly no reward in return? But Lars, you love a smooth surface, and the SoyBeans is smoother than the HotDogs. Well, the reason I loved a smooth surface was that on the original surface, for me, the gaps just served no real purpose, but was to me merely a slight hindrance to smooth slides. But SoundWorkshop has turned the table by putting the tactile markings not between the notes, where they are objectively of no real function if your finger is more or less centered on a pad, but instead having the notches mark the center point of pitch for any note. And that is an innately useful feature that has absolutely changed my preference. I just want these notches now. I do want to point out, though, that I mainly see the difference between the SoyBeans and the HotDogs in the polyphonic and unquantized playing. If we are talking about just playing a solo line, I think they perform equally well for me. Also, if SoyBeans was the only option available, I would be perfectly happy with that and still feel that it would be a huge upgrade. Also, I just feel like mentioning the physical properties of the notches of these new surfaces. One may jump to the conclusion that they are the equivalent of the gaps of the original surface, just placed differently. But no, they are very different to the touch, as they are shallower and have softer edges. So the original kind of goes like very square, and these new notches are more like they're round and shallow. I don't know if that made any sense to look at. To repeat what I said in the first video, I do feel the notches when sliding, but they just don't have any impact on the sliding because they are so smooth. So to sum up, my personal preference is with no doubt the HotDogs version. And I want to add one more thing to that, and that is like a more irrational aesthetic way this version does attract me more. And I think it has something to do with its more obvious kinship to fretted instruments that's just more visible. Like I like these lines over the dots. For me, it's like a more meaningful structure to the design, or I don't know, in fewer words, I think it looks better. But that's just me. So I think that concludes my comparison between the HotDogs and SoyBeans version of the new Speak Bumpy Surface from SoundWorkshop. So is there any concerns that one may have about these new surfaces? Well, I would say a relevant thing to ask is, since we now have these rows that are slightly raised, is sliding between them, like vertical sliding, impaired in any way? And my answer to that is, well, these bumps are very smooth and shallow, so it's like more like really soft waves you skim over. So once you've done that, you realize that, well, actually it feels better than on the original surface, where you have these gaps that gives a fair bit of resistance, which you don't have here. So, well, it's not an issue. And finally, what is that con I promised you earlier? Well, there are people, to be honest, I've only ever seen one person, I think, doing this, but let's just go with the plural, who use the Linnstrument in a way that is shifted 90 degrees like this, so that the rows are columns and vice versa. I think you do need some special software of sorts to do this, and you do lose the ability to slide between notes. Anyway, the bumpy surface will probably not make so much sense to get if you are into playing it in this 90 degree shifted mode. Yeah, I know it's a rather insignificant con. So that's it for now. Feel free to ask me anything about these, since I am one of the extremely few people who has both versions. Cheers! Oh, wait, I'm back. I have a little addendum, a PS, if you will. I'm thinking I might get some comments about what is this weird Linnstrument, about why does it look so weird? It has this wide thing here. Sorry, my voice. It is merely a piece of wood that's added exactly the same way as the original, thin wood thingies with three screws. So the screws are just longer, and then the whole thing is covered with leather. Just basically a comfort thing, really. Also, the leather wraps around on the back side, so it's just a bit nicer to have, like, when you live in a cold country, as I do, to have, if I'm sitting on the sofa with it in my lap, then it's just nice that it's not metal. You might be wondering, but how did I put this on? Well, the thing is that I found that, like, kind of randomly, I had this magnetic rubber kind of material lying around, this stuff here. So that is glued to the back side of the leather, which is, by the way, really heavy duty leather. That means that I can open it up like this if I want to, change the surface or whatever. That has worked extremely well, and it just kind of snaps on because it's magnetic. Yep. So okay. Oh, why did I do it? I think it's really nice to have this hand support where you can I'm just rested here, kind of in the same way that you would often use if you're typing. You would often use like a kind of a wrist support for typing, and this is just the same thing, and I really like it. I have not done it on my smaller one, this one, because I want to keep this one as portable as possible. So that was just it. Cheers, bye.